so complex that calculating it on a single desktop would take 2,000 years. They modeled a volume of space almost 350 million light years across, a large enough chunk to be representative of the whole universe, but detailed enough to delve into individual galaxies, a feat no other team has managed. The model doesn't just tackle the universe's huge range of scales. It also richly describes the forces at work, much better than previous attempts. By factoring in the laws of physics and a variety of theories about how gases cool, stars evolve and black holes grow, the model recreates both the galaxies and stars we can see and the dark matter and dark energy that we can't. The simulation starts just 12 million years after the Big Bang, when things start to get interesting. Dark matter clusters together under the force of gravity. If we could see it, it would look like a web. In fact, scientists call it the cosmic web. Where dark matter is densest, shown as bright pink spots, ordinary matter also clumps and forms into galaxies. Now we're looking at the ordinary matter. Blue shows relatively cold clouds of gas, where stars form. Green is warmer gas, while red and white show hot regions around the most violent galaxies. Supermassive black holes grow at the centre of these. As they gobble up matter, they superheat the material around it, blowing out gas in these violent white bursts. Over time, this enriches the space between galaxies with warm but sparse gas. The simulation also shows the distribution of different elements. The early universe was full of helium and hydrogen. As stars evolve and die in supernovae, they fuse these basic chemicals into heavier elements, such as carbon and oxygen, as well as metals. The violent bursts around black holes spread these elements across space, the pink clouds you see here. Life depends on these chemical building blocks. Only when you have enough of them do planets and complex molecules form. We're looking at dark matter again, and we've almost reached the present day. 14 billion years of the universe's evolution has pulled the tightly woven dark matter web into a looser network of giant galaxy clusters.
That's the story that science tells us about how the universe came to be what it is now. It is based on the best theories we have, the evidence that we have, all that combined together to predict what happens. Notice that God, who is supposed to be everywhere, is nowhere in the video, either physically or as a necessary concept. In other words, she is irrelevant. So what are you going to believe, science or the tales of nomadic tribesmen a long time ago? One of the other claims is that scientists need faith. And this idea is a lot, that scientists also use faith. But there is a difference between the faith of scientists and the faith of religious believers. The thing is, science, as I said, never proves anything to be true. But we act with confidence that they will hold. For example, if I drop an object, it will fall. If I release this on my phone, it will fall. If I do it again, it will fall. If I do it 99 times, it will fall 99 times. I cannot prove that it will fall the 100th time I drop it. Scientists have no way of proving that what will happen the 100th time is the same as what will happen the previous 99 times. But we have faith that it will, because we have faith in the laws of physics, because it produces reliable and useful knowledge. The faith of a scientist is to cross that tiny bridge between 99.9% confidence and certainty. We cannot reach certainty, so we use faith. That's how scientists use the word faith, to bridge that tiny gap. Whereas with religion, faith is a vast gap. A scientist, the faith of a scientist or a religious person is in opposition to evidence. When there is no evidence at all, you are expected to believe this huge thing. You are expected to believe that God exists and created this whole universe without any evidence in support of it. So the word faith is used by religious people quite differently from the way that scientists use faith. With science, faith is, for example, the Higgs boson that was discovered and for which the Nobel Prize was given, was found by scientists who, after weighing all the evidence, said there's a 99.9994% chance that it is accurate and not a mistake. So that we don't have 100%, but we have the faith that that is true. The morality, I never understand the argument about morality, that it's universal. If you look at the Bible, the morality is awful. Disobedient or rude children, stone them to death. Blasphemers, stone to death. Someone working on the Sabbath, stone them to death. Adulterers, stone to death. Woman not a virgin on a wedding night, stone her to death. How can this be a universal moral standard? Everything we know about morality suggests that it has evolved over time culturally. We have some primal moral impulses, but culturally we have added to those, and we are far more moral now than in biblical times. Even Jesus said that he is not there to break the law of the prophet, but to fulfill them, and he supported those very same laws. Scientists are human, and they can fall into the same beliefs as others in wanting to believe what they want to believe. This is why we have all the precautions in science to prevent that. The existence of God, cannot, like the existence of any other entity, is an empirical question that requires an empirical answer and can never be shown to be a purely logical truth. All the things that Joe mentioned are just saying that there are these unresolved questions, therefore God is the answer. That is not how we arrive at reliable knowledge. I think that everyone will concede that the existence of gods, like ghosts or witches or vampires or zombies, is not manifestly true, in that we have no direct evidence that he exists. The best arguments for religious people only take you as far as the mere possibility of an invisible God. But as Delos McCown said, the invisible and the non-existent look very much alike. Unless believers in God produce a preponderance of evidence and repeatable and objective evidence that God exists, we have to treat the claim that God exists in the same way that we treat claims for the existence of other things that are invisible and undetectable, like the ether or phlogiston or three-headed, seven-legged Latin-speaking cows, and conclude that it does not exist. You cannot back into an existence claim for God by simply pointing out unanswered questions that science has not addressed. Because as I said before, science always has unanswered questions. And that's why we need affirmative evidence. Thank you.
First of all, he mentioned, a bit of an interesting statement, is that he said that it was nowhere in that video that God was in that video. I just wonder if God was even introduced or invited to come to that video. Aside from that, he said that there are no arguments, that religion is based on irrationality. Well, that's simply not the case. In fact, I might suggest that I presented two arguments for the existence of God, in which he made a couple of assertions about it, but I didn't hear, for as far as I can see, I didn't hear any argument that would have shown that the arguments that I presented would have in any way been served as a defeater for that argument. I didn't see any proofs against that argument. So I don't think those arguments were addressed at all, just sort of some assertions to the contrary. Also, he mentions, for instance, that toward the end of his original speech, he said at the end there, he made a quick statement, though, that I think is important. He said, we're being more moral now as a people than it ever used to be. Presumably because, as I understand, that he's seeing cultural trends become more secular. And so, we're far more moral now than we ever used to be. Well, considering the fact that Professor Singham says that there's no such thing as absolute morals, I wonder how in the world we could be more moral than we used to be, if there's no set of standards by which we can judge what's moral, what's not, outside of mere impulses. Also, consider this. Is religion really evil? He says the wars that's provided by or was caused by religions. In fact, he made the same argument in a YouTube video that's entitled, Why is Atheism Winning? A very, very similar argument and statement that he made at the end there. It says that religion is evil. In fact, he quoted, I quote, he says, religion, in the video, serves as the power base for the nutters and the extremists. End quote. Well, my question is, and certainly we can list a whole bunch of evils done by religious people, but does atheism or even secularism fare any better? I think it couldn't be argued that secularism or atheism would serve as a power base of secular extremists. For example, Stalin, prior to, of course, there's also Pol Pot and Mao Zedong, Mussolini, Jeffrey Dahmer, Lenin, Hitler. And I know Hitler, some people say, well, he wasn't an atheist, and we won't get into the historical part about that, but I think pretty much the historians are pretty much in consensus that whether he was a nominalist Catholic or not, he was not a Catholic, a devout Catholic. He did things out of his secular agenda and movement. And so he was more motivated by social Darwinism than anything religious. Well, all of these, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Mussolini, Jeffrey Dahmer, Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, and many, many others, that's in the 21st century. In the 20th and 21st century, we can take a look at these and say, has morality really improved? Well, let's take a look. As Dr. David Berlinski says, just to impose upon the suffering human race high explosives, barbed wire, poison gas, experiments in eugenics, napalm, the atomic submarine, and nuclear weapons. If memory serves me, it was not the Vatican. In fact, during the 20th century, World War II, World War I, there was 15 million people killed. Russian Civil War, 9 million. Stalin's Russian regime, 20 million. World War II, 55 million. Chinese Civil War, 2.5 million. Mao Zedong's regime, 40 million. And the list could go on and on. And these were wars and conflicts not motivated by religion, but secularist causes. Now, should we argue that secularism, atheism, being part of that, serves as the power base for atheist extremists? I'm not prepared to argue it that way. Listen, I don't blame atheists for the evil that specific atheists have done, so I kind of wish that the new atheists would quit blaming all religion for the evil that certain religious people have done. If we ever plan on exercising charitable conversations, we need to get past these kinds of new atheist accusations and tactics. The truth is, we want to get past that, and I'm certainly not wanting to engage in that sort of reasoning and accusing people to do anything. In fact, consider this. Religion has served as a powerful, powerful force for good and love in the world. We need to consider and remember that it is the religious people who are the ones who have produced more hospitals, have built children's homes throughout the world, and have fed massive numbers of starving children and families worldwide. In fact, I argue Christianity, rather than serving as the basis of extremism, actually serves as the power base of love, charity in the world, not extremism again. He mentioned that, again, there was no arguments presented or no rational arguments presented other than just showing that God is plausible or whatever. But the fact is there are many, many more arguments I could have presented. For instance, design implies a designer. If there is design, therefore there is a designer. I don't have time to develop this, but just take a look at outside and you'll find the amazing miracles of nature. In fact, the more you look at the universe, the more intelligence you will find in it. One single cell, for instance, has even enough information to fill 80,000 books. And if all the DNA in the human body was stretched out and tied together, it would reach the sun and back, which is 92 million miles apart, not once but 70 times. That amount of information is just astronomical. And what does that have anything to do with anything? We need to remember the movie. I don't know if you've ever watched that movie, Contact with Jodie Foster. Carl Sagan and all the people, Carl Sagan wrote that story, and he says, and in this book, there was a group of scientists who were trying to discover life beyond Earth. Well, how did they do this? By one simple method. They were listening for signals from space that showed evidence. Not just order, but information. Because if they discovered information from space, then they knew they had discovered intelligent life that served as the source of information. Why? Because quite naturally we know that where there is information, there is intelligence behind it. So, he says religion is actually against evidence. I'm trying to present evidence. But having said that, there's a lot of things that we believe, and scientists as well. We're not, he's really about, and he noticed a few times he talks about empirical evidence, as if that's the only way we can prove something. But consider if we adopt that method, in the court system, for instance. If we adopt that method, you can only prove something by empirical data. Well, consider if somebody comes to a criminal scene and a crime was committed, but the criminal isn't there, they can still find the criminal and still put him on trial and find him guilty. How? When they haven't seen the crime. Because they look at the effects of nature. They look at the effects around them. They look at evidences such as fingerprints and various other things. And so there is an empirical observation within that, even though they don't see the criminal do the crime. I'm suggesting to you that whether it's the design argument or the argument from creation or the argument from morality, I'm suggesting that all of these things show us divine fingerprints all over the world. We have proof. We have evidence. He talks about some other things. He said that I had no arguments that show that he heard, no arguments that shows, my argument fails. But let me just say this. I heard no arguments from him that shows my argument fails. And again, he mentions the idea of design or universe. And by the way, that video showed immense design. That was beautiful. Looking at the wonders of creation and the stars. Anthony Flew was an atheist, a very notorious atheist, who wrote a book, God Does Exist. Now, he wrote that because he was converted to become a believer. Now, he would go around and debate many people, many theists, many believers, and he would try to convince people of his atheism, but he came to realize that the more and more we study, the more science does its work, the more evidence of design exists in this world. I don't have time to look at all the statistics here, but there is extreme evidence in this world. And in his book, he outlines some of that. And he says, this is a huge reason why I went from atheism to being a believer. And he was a scientist who was an atheist. It was the very design, it was the very empirical world that we see that he believes pointed us to something so much higher, something so much beyond itself, because the fingerprints of God's handiwork was all over creation. He had mentioned, quickly, he said we can conceive of the existence of God, but that this does not mean that God exists. Something of that sort, I didn't get the quote exactly right, but this goes into, of course, the modal ontological argument, which I know I don't have time to get into right now. But suffice it to say that there is a modal argument. I'm going to see if I can't get this in. If somebody is committed to the idea that God exists possibly, logically possibly, if God is logically possibly can exist, then number one, I would suggest to you that by definition is not a strong or hard atheist, but more in line with agnosticism. But that's a matter of semantics that could be debated. But what I want to say, though, is in addition to that, is that when we look at evidence, we need to consider not just the empirical, visible world that we live in. You know, I don't know how I could empirically prove that my wife loves me. I don't know how I could prove that through empirical data alone. Just because somebody holds somebody's hand or kisses them or makes dinner. There are people doing that all around the country, all around the world doing that, but they go through the motions, but they don't truly love the person. How would you prove empirically that your wife loves you or your husband loves you? We are human beings that are more than just empirical creations, empirical things. We're more than just machines operating by certain observable patterns of evidence that we prove deductively. We're also artistic human beings. Poetry, love, goodness. All of these things exist in the world and point directly to a loving being who is a personal being, who in fact does exist and gives us that very sense of love and compassion as well. He talks about morality. Oh, and also talks about that science doesn't really have no need for God, sort of pushes God out in so many words. That's simply not the case. Physicist Dr. Lawrence Krauss, who's an atheist, he says this in his book. He says the laws of nature could be almost anything. The universe is far stronger and far more richer, more wonderfully strange than our wildest imaginations can anticipate. Modern cosmology has driven us to consider ideas that could not have been formulated a century ago. I have a few questions then for Dr. Krauss. If the laws of nature could almost be anything, then can it be possible that the laws of nature be of such a sort to allow miracles? If it could be almost anything. Dr. Krauss admits that we have no idea what the possibilities are with regard to nature. Could it be, then, that these possibilities could include events we sometimes call miracles? If the universe is far stranger than our wildest imaginations, end quote, is it possible that miracles or God's interactive activity in our world could be included in what our wildest imaginations can anticipate? If modern cosmology has driven us to consider ideas that could not have been formulated a century ago, according to Dr. Krauss, is it possible that they will drive us to consider ideas, including the possibility of miracles, in the upcoming century? The idea here isn't the God of the gaps. I'm not saying science doesn't have an answer, therefore God. What I'm saying is more of a positive argument than that. What I'm saying is as Professor Singham seems to suggest, is science to sort of push God out as a need for explanation. Science simply has not done so. Thank you.
The rules.
I do want to consider about two additional clues that I believe strongly point us in the direction of God's existence. These are, first of all, the existence of beauty in the world, and number two, the reality of ultimate meaning in life. Consider first that the existence of God is the only reasonable answer to the universal human need for ultimate meaning and purpose to life. When I asked Professor Singham if there is any ultimate meaning in life, he said, and I quote, "But if by ultimate meaning you mean something that exists independently of us, then the answer is no. We find meaning by creating it ourselves, individually and collectively." But consider this argument. Something has meaning if and only if a personal agent or group of agents endows it with meaning. Number two, there is a personal agent that endows all human life with ultimate meaning. Therefore, all human life has been endowed with ultimate meaning. Now, Professor Singham and I seems to be in agreement with the first premise, but not the last two. The area, though, it seems to me, is the biggest disagreement, seems to be who the personal agent is that endows life with meaning. Professor Singham says that life is endowed with meaning only by human persons creating it for themselves. But this idea carries with it two unavoidable implications. Number one, it would mean that no human act or decision could have any intrinsic value or meaning to it at all. It would mean that stomping on a baby's... By the way, I know Mano Singham does not believe this. That's not what I'm suggesting. But it would imply that stomping on a baby's head for fun would be no less intrinsically, maybe creatively meaning, but not intrinsically meaningful than stepping on an ant. It would mean that one person's created meaning would be no more or less valuable than another person's created personal meaning. If millionaire Bob decided that the meaning of his life for him would be to eat Cheetos and play video games all day, every day, then his meaning to life would be just as meaningful as millionaire Susan's decision to give her life to helping orphans and feeding the hungry around the world. There simply would be no value distinctions between their choices of meaning beyond mere opinion, culture, or individual. But assuming that we're able to think properly, we all know, all of us know, I'm sure, that a baby's life is inherently more meaningful than an anthill. And we all know that Susan's cause is much more meaningful than Bob's. Thus, no one, so it seems to me, ought to view that there is no objective meaning to human existence apart from our own arbitrary creations, whether collectively or individually. Now, I'm not saying again that Professor Singham believes these implications. What I'm saying is his atheistic view of life's meaninglessness implies them just the same. It's my view, though, that human beings are made in the image of God, and that God is the person that endows ultimate and eternal meaning to our lives, and that this makes better sense of humanity's inescapable convictions about life's meaning. Consider second, though, that the existence of the divine artist makes better sense of the artistic beauty found in the universe than the accidental blind forces behind or implied by atheism. When we look out at the world, we see amazing beauty such that it appears artistically crafted. But beautiful art suggests a beautiful artist, or a gifted artist. Therefore, it seems to me that a gifted artist appears to have painted, so to speak, on the canvas of the cosmos, thus artistically crafting the world we live in. Go into any art gallery, and you see a beautiful painting of the world on the wall. Now, you know intuitively that a gifted and talented painter put it there. Everybody agrees with that, but if that were true, why would we think any differently about the real thing? I agree with Camille Paglia, who is herself an atheist, but yet worries about what a world would look like without belief in God, when she says, quote, "But a totally secularized society with contempt for religion sinks into materialism and self-absorption and gradually goes slack, without leaving an artistic legacy. Without God, there is no art, no beauty, no morals, no meaning. But that is not the kind of world we find ourselves in. There is art, beauty, meaning, and morals just because there is a God who is the very ground of all being, the very basis of all that is, and the very inspiration of the creation of all things beautiful. Thus, the preponderance of evidence lies highly in favor of the belief that God exists, and hardly supports the proposition tonight that God does not exist, but in fact, so I argue, when all clues considered together, makes that proposition simply unreasonable. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Let me begin by addressing some points. This idea that without God you can't have truth and beauty and awe and wonder and love, and I just don't understand that. Why is God necessary for any of those things? I showed them the video of the universe. When I see that, I think we have we just live in a tiny speck of the universe. For a tiny time, humans have been here. And yet we have been able to figure out the history of our universe over 14 billion years. It fills me with wonder and pleasure. The fact that science has explained it does not take away from that wonder, it makes it even greater. We now understand so many things. When I listen to a Beethoven symphony, the fact that I know how sound works and vibrations and how my ear generates that in my brain and how my brain processes it, does not take away from the beauty of the music, it enhances it. Joe says he's not arguing a God of the gaps, but it is entirely a God of the gaps. He points to things and says, how could this have happened? How could it be so beautiful? How could the universe be so wonderful without a God? No. If you are saying God exists, you have to provide evidence for God. You can't simply say, we don't understand this. Right now, religious people use 4 things. The origin of the universe, the origin of life, morality and consciousness. To argue that without God, we can't explain those things. No. Those things used to be mysteries in that people puzzled. Now they become puzzles. Scientists are working on all these areas. And we are making great strides. And you can be sure that we will get there. As to without God, we would be killing babies. It is the Bible that argues that you should stone your own children to death if they just talk back at you. It's not atheists who say it, it's the Bible that says it. So where is this universal morality that says that? As to being more violent, Steven Singham wrote a book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he argues that yes, the 20th century was a violent time, but if you look at the data over all history, 20th century was also more populous, that we have less probability of being killed now than ever in the history of the universe. The past was very violent, but we forget all those violent things that happened before because they were far long ago. In my final remarks, I want you to appeal to all of you to join me in that wonderful world that opens up when we shed the prison of religious thought and enter the open spaces of science. I know that taking that step is not easy for a religious person because believers have been frightened with images of hell and torment. To think even for a moment that God does not exist may make people feel guilty and frightened because they have been taught that God can read their minds and that He may punish them even for their thoughts. I am here to encourage you to break free of those. There is no hell. There is no God. Okay? And there are many like me, and the numbers are increasing, who have shared this kind of thinking. I urge you to take that same step, and you will find many people who will help you along that new journey of freedom. This may surprise you, but I used to be very religious myself. I was an ordained lay minister of my church. I remember that as trying to reconcile science with religion became harder and harder to do, I at one point tentatively asked myself the question in a very frightened way, what if there is no God? Suddenly, everything made sense, and I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off me and that I was free. That feeling was exhilarating. Suddenly the world made sense to me without trying to fit God into it. I know that I am not alone. When I talk to other former believers, they tell very similar stories. Robert Ingersoll put it well. He said, when I became convinced that the universe is natural, that all the ghosts and gods are myths, they are entered into my brain, into my soul, into every drop of my blood, the sense, the feeling, the joy of freedom. The walls of my prison crumbled and fell. The dungeon was flooded with light, and all the bolts and bars and manacles became dust. What I am telling you is that the key to opening that door, the prison door, is to get rid of all those ideas and beliefs that come out of the old religious books and which imprison people, and step outside. The outside world is amazing, and you too can experience the thrill of discovering the wonders of the universe by becoming free from the burdens of religious dogma. Bertrand Russell said it well. Even if the open windows of science at first make us shiver, after the cozy indoor warmth of traditional humanizing myths, in the end, the fresh air brings vigor, and the great spaces have a splendor of their own. So I urge you to join me in that exploring that great world that exists outside, the world of science and reliable knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a enlightening discussion. Nice job for both of you. Okay, at this point, we're going to take a 15-minute intermission in order to set up for a question and answer period, as I mentioned earlier. So if you have questions that you'd like to submit in writing, please identify who the question is for initially, and then the question, please make it as clear as possible. Somebody up here is going to have to read it, so if you can make that easier, that's better. If you would like to make an oral question, we'll have microphones on both sides. Line them on this side if you'd like to ask Dr. Singham, on this side if you'd like to ask Mr. Puckett. So please, 15 minutes, and then please come back here.